Hello once again, and welcome to A River Between Chaos and Zen, the poetry podcast from Creative Actors Lab on behalf of my wife Kelly, and my name is Max. So this time I wanted to actually talk about poetry, but where do poems come from? And probably the easiest way for me to get into that subject is by referencing a couple of poems that I wrote. The one of which is actually gets I wrote this poem many years ago. I performed it. I've done it in poetry readings. I've been a featured reader. I've done it as a performance piece. It's a pretty unhinged little piece of poetry called All I'm Saying, and this comes from the time that I spent living in Miami, Florida, which was entirely too long, from about ages 8 to 35. And for those of you who don't know, if you're not familiar with South Florida, a lot of crazy crap goes on down there. And one problem I think this poem has had, and as a lot of stuff is written kind of inspired by events of South Florida, is a lot of these stories come out and people read the stuff and they go, that is just unhinged and batshit crazy, and human beings don't behave like that. That's just nuts. Well, you've never been to South Florida, and yeah, they do. It's a freak show down there, and I lived there for a very long time. And I got at a young age, probably one of the first writers that ever really spoke to me, really inspired me, was a guy by the name of Harry Crews. He's not a poet, but his writing left a very, very indelible mark upon me when I was a young man growing up. What is it about, pissed off young Southern men and Harry Crews and Southern Gothic, kind of hard edge, whiskey drinking, hard living, hard loving type of writers that just really spoke to me. He was kind of like a Hemingway, but way, way grittier. This poem actually is a composite of several people that I knew from back in the day. This starts off actually being inspired by a gentleman that I knew worked at a convenience store that was on my way home at the time from school, and I would stop there every day and get my pack of cigarettes and my beverages and candy bars and whatever. But I would always stop in, and this guy would be at the counter like every day, and we would get into these discussions and talks. And he was a very very emotional young man. He was at the time, this is the early 80s, he was really into the band Joy Division, which I could not get into. It seemed very morose, and it just did not speak to me, frankly, at all. But we would get into these discussions, and we did share kind of this bond, kind of this kinship of just being two young men who were dealt with a lot of depression and anger and anxiety and so forth. And one day I was driving home, and I was going to stop and get my cigarettes, and there was a line of police tape going all the way around the convenience store, and I couldn't get in there, and didn't know what had happened. There was police cars, and so I kept driving, and the next day I stopped in, and somebody else was behind the counter, and I said, what happened? As it turned out, the young man, this friend of mine, who lived in apartments across the street, apparently the day before, had, for whatever reason, murdered his grandmother and his 4-year-old nephew in the apartment across the street. Stabbed them both to death with a screwdriver. Never saw him again. There's a couple of other things in here, and then this is a composite poem. I worked for a guy at one point down there who You walked into his house and there were literally guns and ammunition. There had to have been 100 guns of all, of rifles and, I'm no gun person, so I don't know, but just handguns and rifles and small guns and mid-sized guns and big guns and all of this. And boxes full of canned food in his living room stacked high and everything. And he had generators and cases of scotch. He was, by the way, the guy was, he was a bottle of scotch a day drinker kind of guy. So there's some of his influences in here. He apparently was being followed by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and he told me the story when I started working for him that, ATFB is they're looking for me, and I said, well, and he said he told the officers that when the state of anarchy breaks out, he wants to be prepared. I worked for him for about a month and a half, and then I just had enough of those festivities, and so welcome to South Florida, kids. The stuff the Chamber of Commerce does not want you to hear. But there's some other influences in here, and it's all sort of a composite poem. And when I've done this piece a couple of times, actually my wife and my daughters have gotten kind of really scared and nervous. They said, Dad, you can't do this. You can't read this. I'm like, why? And it basically kind of came around. It's like, it's a compliment basically, but they were like, you perform that poem too well, and people are going to think that you're speaking about yourself. And I'm not. I'm speaking with the voice of these people who, for lack of a better word, inspired this poem, and so much of what I saw go on down in South Florida. This was during the 1970s and 80s, and it was until the latter 1990s that Kelly and I and our little daughter at the time, Amber, were finally got out of there, and I got some distance and I got some perspective on South Florida, just living there, and just the whole batshit crazy. Just the whole batshit crazy thing that went on down there. So, on that note, here we go. The depth of this hill is as steep as its climb. In the silence of sex lies the stillness of time, while lusting for death, seductions of crime danced on the brain and chewed at the liver, clouded the eyes and made the corpse quiver. Ink spots that fell on the carpet remain. Her precious boy's blood would rush down the drain. Policemen are fools who ransack and rape, he said at confession that was recorded on tape. The news would proclaim, this boy had gone mad. A quick, lustful fix killed the chances he had. White trash from Florida is invading our city. It's an abortion our taxes must pay for this pity. I'll lock up my daughter. I'll chain up my wife. I'll shoot the son of a bitch who tries to fuck up my life. In my fort of canned goods, toilet paper, and ammo will be safe as the god that sits up on high, while the rest of you cannibals eat shit and die. Streets are not safe for folk like me. And if you don't watch your step, I'll go hide in a tree and hose your ass down with an Uzi if you step in my yard. 'Cause I watch the news, and it scares me to know there are people out there like that and like you who threaten my world, my church, and my life. And if you think I'm paranoid, thank my fourth wife. She's under the floorboards in plastic and mud. If you pigs want more evidence, go wade through the crud. The last time I killed her was the last time I saw her. And that's all I'm saying until I speak to my lawyer. So the other poem that I wanted to get into is actually, it's another poem really inspired by living in South Florida and all the craziness, and particularly in the 1970s and 80s, where many things can be said about the 1970s and 80s, particularly during the during that period of time, the cocaine cowboys. There's one thing well, you could say many things about it, but the main thing that I would comes to my mind at this point is, Jesus Christ, there was so much fucking cocaine in that place. I'm at a point in my life to where it's like I just have no patience for that stuff. It is some of the most evil stuff I've ever encountered in my life, and I am very grateful that I got out of my own use of it. I got out of it before things got really bad. But basically what had happened, where this poem comes from, is I was doing a lot of coke and stuff like that, and it was just starting to get really right on the verge of getting out of hand, which with cocaine doesn't take much. But I actually had a dream one night that I was in a public restroom, and two women followed me in, and I became aware of the fact that these two women were the devil. And they were trying to get me to come over to them, and I was just not having it. And I was not then, and I was not a religious person. I'm still not. But there's parts of the Bible I really, really dearly love, and the Psalms are one of those things. Even in the 23rd Psalm in particular, it's, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. But that dream happened one night, and I remember I was in the dream, and I started going, wake up, wake up, wake up, you gotta fucking wake up now. And I woke up, I looked at my bedside clock, it was 4:15 a.m., and there was a Bible that my mom had given me. And I just like, get to the Bible, get to the Bible, get to the Bible. And I read the 23rd Psalm, and I immediately went back to sleep. And it was 4:17 a.m. I closed my eyes. I immediately went back to the public restroom in the dream with these two women who were acting progressively more and more evil and unhinged, and they were trying to be very seductive and sexual. And I was like, you need to fuck the hell off, bitches. And I got into some war of words and spirit, and I don't know what you want to call it, but I watched these two women in a dream shrink down to absolutely nothing. And when I opened my eyes, the time on the alarm clock was 4:19 a.m. And that was one of those instances where, when anybody who gets that scared, I defy you to remain an atheist. And very soon after that, the last time that I ever touched cocaine, I was about 23 years old. At this point, this is about 40 years ago. I was with a buddy of mine, and we got some coke, and he had this like door-sized like bedroom mirror, and he laid it out on his bed, and he's like laying out these big fat lines of coke, which back then was like, Merry Christmas, everybody. And my nose is running just thinking about it. And I started to, and so we started snorting lines. And he, in the middle of all this, he starts talking about the way that they process cocaine in South America. And so we've got this big mirror, and I'm bent down over the mirror, and I'm snorting a line. And in the middle of all this, he said something about how, over in the cocaine processing plants, rats are running around, and sometimes rats just fall into the vats of the coca leaves, and they get ground up, and so, it's highly likely that you may be snorting, ground up rat corpses in the middle of all this cocaine. And of course, the guys doing that, they either don't care or they think it's a big joke. And right around that instant, I sort of, with this straw stuck up my nose, hoovering up a line of coke, I saw myself, and I looked myself straight in the eye, and I was like, you need to cut this shit out now. And I mean, you need to cut it out now. And I stopped mid-line, and I handed the dollar bill over to him, and I said, dude, you finish it. I'm done. I'm never touching the stuff again. And he's like, what? There's like, you're not going to finish that? And I'm like, no, I am truly done. So he's like, more for me? And at that point, we'd snorted so much coke that I started feeling really, really weird, and my heart started going crazy and all this. And I somehow or another managed to get out of there, got in my car, got home, locked myself in my room, and I, honest to God, thought I was going to die. And then I became very crystally clear aware of the fact that there were a lot of rats in the walls of our house, and they all hated me. And they were and the rats were in the walls, and they were plotting about how much we hate Max and we're going to fucking kill him. And I was absolutely convinced of that in that second. And I just started praying. And I just started, and I said, if I get out of this fucking thing alive, I will never touch that stuff again. And guys, I have not. And I probably needed to be scared that badly because addiction is stronger than knowledge. And I am very, very lucky to be alive. And I had some very dear friends back in the day, one of whom actually gets spoken about in this particular poem, that things did not end so well. And it's a tragedy. And it's an avoidable tragedy. And that is where this poem comes from. The night the rats in the walls told me it was time to stop doing cocaine came just before the morning, the devil taunting me in a dream in which he tried to seduce and intimidate, but I fired back with the 23rd Psalm at 4:15 a.m. Just before breakfast, the marsh was quiet and the Bible became my friend on the day that started too early but began almost too late for my heart to survive my companion's failed suicide. Her arms and her neck, I would cuddle no more, but only to speak at a distance to her ghost that dwelled within skin, torn by ropes, unseen by all except me. And I said, there but by the grace go I, and there she goes away from me. And with the coming of the dawn, the lie recedes, the dream blends into day, and the night, thank God, is over. Thank you guys so much for listening to A River Between Chaos and Zen, the poetry podcast for Creative Actors Lab. My name is Max, and on behalf of my wife, Kelly, we thank you so much. Until next time, may the long-time sun shine upon you, all love surround you, and the pure light within you guide your way on. Amen.